Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about how to write a philosophy essay in the analytic tradition. I think that analytic philosophy is the best way to write a philosophy paper. If you're someone who struggles with writer's block or can't figure out even where to start for a philosophy paper, then the analytic tradition is probably the way to go for your paper structure. It's a structure used by analytic philosophers, obviously, but the best thing about analytic structure is that it can be applied in any field or subject, anything you'd really like. It's foolproof if you do it right. So I've written essays in both the continental and analytic traditions, and I'm here to say, after evaluating my writing in each course, after taking one in each tradition, I'm saying that the analytic tradition is honestly much more clear, it's more concise, and dare I say, more conducive to originality. Analytic philosophy gets straight to the point. What I like about the papers written in the tradition is that they're very easy to follow and generally always follow a standard format. The format is as follows. Question, thesis, argument, defensive premises, objection, replies, and the appendix. Let's break down each section, shall we? The question. So, you know how your professor gives you a prompt. Well, philosophy essays don't really ever start out with general statements. Those are like, Plato was the greatest philosopher of all time, or something else. Rather, philosophy essays are more direct and pointed. Your first few sentences are going to want to be stating some assumptions the reader can proceed on the basis of, assuming, so that they can consider the thesis. I guess the question is a little bit of a restatement of the prompt, but it's not an answer to it. But that's about it for the question part. The thesis, though. The thesis is going to be the answer to the prompt. And let me just tell you and save you some time, you should and are encouraged in the analytic philosophy tradition to explicitly say in your thesis, this paper will argue blank. Let's write that down. This paper will argue blank. This is your golden ticket. Do you know why I say golden ticket? Because it is exactly what the professors are looking for. This is no ambiguous thesis. This tells exactly what you're going to be arguing. So if your argument does not say this, or your defense of your premises doesn't defend that, then it's not going to be a very good essay. But this, as long as you're coherent with it, will guarantee you a pretty good standard grade already. But I will argue for my thesis with an argument constructed in whatever valid argument form you choose would also come after it. So you'd say, my paper will argue that all cats have 9 lives. I will argue for my thesis through 4 sections, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, somewhere in your introduction, you're going to also want to have like a roadmap, what I just was insinuating. For example, you'd say in section 1, I discuss blank. In section 2, I discuss this. In section 3, I defend my premises. In section 4, I will consider it an objection, and so on. But yeah, once you establish your thesis, you're going to want to stick to it validly into an argument. So the argument. What's that? If I just said what the thesis was, and I just said what the question was, where does the argument come in? Well, the argument is going to be a validly constructed premise to conclusion form layout that starts with your reasoning of why you believe your conclusion and ends with that conclusion. The conclusion being the thesis, the blank of this paper will argue blank. I discussed different forms of valid arguments in one of my earlier reels. You can definitely find that if you're struggling, and if you scroll down a little bit earlier on my Instagram account. But the argument would be best executed if you do so in a clear, numbered, premise to conclusion form way. That way you're going to be able to defend them in the most clearly section for like the defense of the premises in the analytic essay. Just so we're clear, it is okay and encouraged to write your premise to conclusion form as 1, 2, C. And what that does is that it enables you to refer to each premise as just like the number. So 1 is defended by this. 2 is defended by this. By defending the premises, you defend the conclusion because they necessarily imply the conclusion. So there's no need to, like, if you have a sub-argument, make it C1 or C2. You could, you don't have to, you don't really defend the conclusion by defending the conclusion explicitly, you defend the premises, which is what we're going to talk about next. The premise defenses. The defense of the premises provide evidence and reasoning as to support the structure of your main argument. You may choose to do so in a sub-construction of your argument, like a 3-4 conclusion type way, like I just put here. But you also might do so with a proof by case. You can also use external evidence. There are really no limits in the defense of premises, but you must consider what the strongest defense is and carry that throughout the whole essay mainly. Yes, other defenses other than the strongest one will work in this section, and you should absolutely mention them. But it might take some time to figure out what the strongest defense is, but it's worth it because if it's the strongest defense that coherent thinkers would have no option to accept other than that one defense, then there's no other option other than to accept your conclusion because it necessarily follows from the premises. That's why we defend the premises. But after the premise defenses, you'll go on to write the objection and reply. A good essay will consider one of each, an objection and a reply tied to that objection. So there's going to be a little bit of a link. You're not going to reply to an objection that doesn't exist. You actually have to think of the objection. It's going to be from the critic's point of view. For this part, you're going to have to step into your opposer's shoes and see why they might disagree with your conclusion. And like I was saying for the defense of the premises, the conclusion necessarily follows from the truth of your premises. So if they disagree with your conclusion, that means they actually disagree with one of your premises. Keep that in mind. You have to see, well, if my argument's logically valid and the critic disagrees with my conclusion, then they must disagree with one of my premises. You must be charitable in the objection. If you were the critic, you'd want to be given due diligence when exploring your objection, so do so for others in your paper. You'll have to specifically explore the premise that the critics object and provide reasons for why they think this and why it's coherent with their school of thought. You don't have to say, oh, this is a very good objection. I think that, I need to reject my entire essay. No, you don't have to say that. But that also doesn't come in the objection, it comes in the reply. You can say, this critic thinks this is why they believe this, and this is coherent with the school of thought because blank. It's just a very straightforward way of asking the critic's point of view and answering from that. So then the reply. You have a couple of options with the reply to the critics. You have 5 options actually. You can deny, deflect, absorb, modify, or reject. I talk about these 5 reply options in another rule. Maybe it came out already, maybe it didn't, but we'll see. Stay tuned to hear about those. But the bottom line is that you have to reply to these critics in a way that preserves the integrity of your paper and respects the authority and research of others and experts in the field. You again must be charitable in the reply too. However, it's understood that you're writing a paper and with a purpose here. You're trying to convince people. The reply should say just enough to address the critics without being dismissive. However, if it's a really strong reply, you'd have to, deny it and or deny your proposition and say, well, this was so good that I have to deny everything. And then let me just talk quickly about the appendix, proof of validity and citations. So the standard for the analytic tradition is footnote citations. That's kind of the way you do it. You can have footnotes throughout the paper, but then you'd want to list them at the end of the paper in the appendix. The proof of validity is for either it's requested or it's not. Don't put it if it's not requested. It's a little bit hard to do, and it's not worth losing points on if it wasn't even supposed to be there in the first place. But proof of validity just says, modus ponens. I'm not going to go into propositional logic right now, but it just proves the validity of modus ponens, modus tollens, hypothetical syllogism, whatever argument form that you put in. And yeah, citations, proof of validity, it's all in the appendix. You can also mention the appendix in the paper, so say, I will argue for my thesis through an argument construction modus ponens. You can find a proof of validity for that in the appendix section of my paper. Something like that. But yeah, you should conclude with ending remarks and a general summary of what you discussed in your paper. The question in the thesis, probably the first part of the argument will all be in the intro. The beef of your paper is going to be the defense of the premises. Remember that. It could take 2/3 of your paper to review the defense of the premises. It has before for me. I've once defended my premises in 800 words in a 1,500 word paper. So it's going to be a big chunk of it. But yeah, thanks for watching and keep up the critical thought.